Hey everyone, Token Dave over here, the dorky token black guy that's just trying to get by. And welcome to another edition of Helltober, my celebration of horror and Halloween in the month of October. This summer, we lost George A. Romero. And this was a huge shock and a great loss in the film industry. Not only was he a legendary movie maker, but he was also a pillar in the horror community. Now, this death is kind of hit me in my heart. And the reason why is because I've told you guys a few times that I was very close to my uncles. And particularly my older uncle, I became close with in my pre-teens and teenage years. And what helped solidify our bond was actually watching the George Romero trilogy. And every time I watched one of the original George Romero movies, I always think back to my uncle asking me if I wanted to watch, the movie that's going to be reviewed in a few moments, which is Night of the Living Dead. And so it was through George Romero's work, that I ended up starting to establish a close bond with my uncle. So to pay homage to the great George A. Romero, to help me getting closer to my uncle and establishing that relationship, I am going to take my crack at reviewing his classic horror masterpiece, Night of the Living Dead. Now, for those that have not seen the movie, number one, where the hell have you been? Shame on you. Watch this movie right now. But, to be fair, I'll explain the plot of the movie. So, the dead has begun to rise all over the world, particularly in a rural area of Pennsylvania where a distinctly diverse group of people have barricaded themselves in an abandoned farmhouse to keep themselves safe from a growing horde of zombies. This movie is a classic for so many reasons. Plot not being one of them, because the plot is fairly simple. We have to keep in mind that while this is 1968, more movies will begin to be made in color. And what George A. Romero did on such a low budget was give us special effects that, despite being in black and white, still kind of remarkably hold up today. And George A. Romero in this movie really pushed the envelope with things. Not only did he push things with the special effects with such a low budget, he incorporated some nudity, which was not really seen in many black and white movies. But more importantly, he had an African-American male as the lead protagonist of the movie, which sparked a huge controversy at the time. And, people were saying, a black actor can't maintain a mainstream movie for very long, and despite Sidney Poitier being able to do so, it was still very few and far between and controversial, especially since it was a horror movie. And the reports are said, from documentaries and interviews, George A. Romero hired Dwayne Jones, who plays Ben, the lead protagonist. George A. Romero constantly said they hired him because he gave the best audition. And to be honest, I believe that. I genuinely believe that. Normally, people tend to pander, but at that time, I could really believe George A. Romero, especially since we have to keep in mind, this is in the 60s, Pennsylvania, still a huge rural area, but there are a lot of spots that were not doing well financially. And we could tell that his access to quality actors, or even quality amateurs, was very few and far between. In addition, one thing that really stood out was basically establishing a lot of the characters, something that most movies have trouble doing today. All the characters were well established, and even quite a few had decent arcs. Even though it was like some people it was easy to see who might be expendable, but for a majority of the characters, you couldn't see. And to be frank, a lot of the characters, you really kind of clung on to them for different reasons. However, George A. Romero does something very unique in his earlier zombie films. He actually had an underlining theme to them. Every movie or every story has a theme, but his themes were very much socially relevant for their times. In this case, the social relevance was the fact that we, as humans, are the biggest monsters against ourselves. And you saw this within the characters, particularly with our main human antagonist, within Harry Cooper, who always wants to be in control and always feels threatened. And when something goes wrong, he actually basically tries to take charge, making things his way or the highway. And you also see that this attitude has put a strain on his marriage when you see him interact with his wife in the movie. In addition, we also see a lot of the racial tensions within this movie. Something that was really not on direct display the whole time, but as well, basically, there was an underlying tone with it, and it is more so seen towards the climax of the movie. Now, while this is a classic, it's not a perfect movie. A major flaw for this movie is the editing. There are so many mistakes in this movie, with the cuts, with the dialogue, with trying to pull off a convincing performance that, a lot of obvious mistakes in this movie. In addition, the acting is spotty at times, with the exception of Judith O'Dea, who plays Barbara. All the other female actors are terrible. Horrible, actually. The male actors do a decent job, but the females are so bad in this movie. In addition, there are also sometimes where people do something really stupid. Not often, but sometimes when people do something outlandishly stupid, it's like, come on, this is really retarded. You can't just say this is like 1960s logic. No, this is just dumb, But despite that, black and white special effects that still hold up to this day, pretty much decent performance, gore and blood that was very, very revolutionary for the time in cinema, especially for black and white. Having the gall to have a minority lead in his movie, and to top it off, giving us a bit of a social commentary, that is very fitting, especially more so for these times. Night of the Living Dead is slamming. I know it's a controversial rating, it's a classic, it should be the best rating, but it is a highly effective movie, and it goes to show to the caliber of a director that George A. Romero was able to actually produce other movies within this series, and they have been vast improvements from the original. Agree? Disagree? Drop me a comment below. Give me a like. Follow me on Facebook at Token Dave or Twitter at TokenDave80. Subscribe and ring that bell so you know when a new video loads. Especially since this Helltober is predominantly going to be talking about the Living Dead series. So until then, later, guys.